everyone, it's Denise with Liquid Color, and today we are going to be taking a look at how to make the swatch cards that I use here on the channel to compare my different paints together. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about kind of the evolution of these cards, and by no means are these all-encompassing. There are other swatch cards that have more information on them, like lifting and dispersion and things like that, but this is just kind of my binder to keep track of different brands, comparing them to one another, and to know kind of what hues and colors that I want to include in my palette. When I first started making these swatch cards, I was mainly just concerned with getting the most out of my sheets of paper. I was using 9x12, and so 2x3-inch rectangles divide really well into a 9x12 piece of paper. And when I made these originally, I made them so that they had hole punches in them and I could put them on a ring and keep them all together. However, over the months, I have gained more and more of these through samples that you guys have sent me, through the paints that I have in my own collection and swatch cards that I get from companies and things like that. So I have over 200 of them now, and they don't all fit on a ring. So I upgraded to this binder, and now I keep them in these are like trading card or baseball card sleeves that I ordered off of Amazon. I'll put a link in the description below for you if you're interested in them. And these sleeves would hold a 2.5x3.5 piece more snugly. So if you want something that fits in here really snugly, I would recommend cutting 2.5x3-inch squares or rectangles, but I have the 2x3s because that's kind of what I started with, and it's the most economical option for the paper that I use. I used to have these all arranged by brand, so I'd have all of one brand on one page or 2 pages if I needed it, and then I would go through all the different ones. But I find for most of the reviews that I do here on the channel, I need them to be color organized, because if I'm looking to do, for instance, my color spotlight on Hansa Yellow, I want all of my PY3s in the same place and not have to go through all of them. So I've organized them from yellows to oranges, reds to pinks, purples, blues, teals, greens, browns, golds I guess, and then browns, and then I have got my darker colors. I do keep my Kuratakis separate still because they're not quite watercolors. I haven't done a review yet, but it's on my list of things to do. And then I keep all of my handmade watercolors separately. So these are Redwood Willow, and then I have my Pfeiffer and a couple of Eves. Then I also went ahead and hole punched my dot cards from Schminka and Daniel Smith, so I can have those in here too. So that's kind of what my binder looks like, and now we're going to get into how I cut up and kind of organize my swatches here. I'll go ahead and pull out, let's see, let's get a nice one for you to look at throughout the course of the video. Here we go, here's a new one. Oh, that's the other thing too, is I had someone ask me this on Instagram, and they asked what this darker stripe was and why it wasn't on all of them. When I first started doing them, I just did a regular graded wash from top to bottom, and then I started deciding that I wanted to see what it would look like with a second wash over the top. So any of the newer ones or ones that I put into my big studio palette that I just did, I went through and put the second glaze over the top of it, and that's what that stripe is. They're not on all of them because as much as I love things pretty and organized, I didn't want to go back to all of the different swatches of paints that I have here and find their matches, so I'm just going to do them as they kind of come up in my collection. So the other question that I get a lot is whether or not I use a paper cutter or I use scissors, and I absolutely use a paper cutter. I picked up this paper cutter, it's from Swingline on Amazon. It was like $25, so it's not the best paper cutter in the world, but it works, and I've had it for probably close to a year now. I use it for all of my elementary school classes that I teach, so I cut paper with it for that, and I cut my swatch cards with it, and I trimmed out paintings, so it goes up to 12 inches on each side. It's a good size for smaller pieces, and I find it really invaluable. It also has a ruler here on the top, if you can see there. So it's a 12-inch piece of paper. It fits the entire board. It would also fit if I put it the other way. And before we start cutting this though, we want to make sure that we have our black lines. Pull this up here again. This black line done in Sharpie, I mean, you could do them all individually if you want, but it's a lot easier to kind of map them out on your paper first. I have two different papers that I'm going to show you here today, and the reason I wanted to do this is that I just kind of want to show you that it matters what type of paper you swatch your paints on, because they're going to look different on different surfaces. Now, the one on top here is Arches, or Arche, depending on what part of the world you live in, and this is the paper that I paint on a regular basis, so I do all my swatches on this even though it's expensive paper. I think it's worth it because I know what colors I'm really going to be getting. I'm also going to be doing a swatch of the Canson Montval to kind of show you the differences. This is a student quality paper. It's cold pressed, but it's a lot smoother than the Arches is. The sizing is different, and so I was going to show you one on each. The first thing that I do is I go ahead and it's 9 and 12, and so 12 is divisible by 3 and 2, but it's not but 9 is not divisible by 2. So I do my 3 inches going on the shorter end, and I do my 2 inches going across. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to put my ruler here, and I'm going to put little tick marks at the 3 and 6 marks, and I don't want that to be too dark. I'm sorry if you can't see it very well, but I'll draw the lines and you'll be able to see those. And I'm just going to do the same over here. And I'm using a yardstick right now, and the only reason I use a yardstick instead of a shorter ruler for this project in particular is that I started using it to do all of my black lines that I'm going to show you in just a moment. And so the edges are already kind of marred by my black marker, and I didn't want to get that on my other nicer ruler. But it's a bit long and cumbersome, so if you just want to use a regular ruler, by all means. Now, I used to do all of my 2-inch marks, and if you're cutting these out by hand, you'll still want to do those. And so in that case, you would just put down the ruler and mark every 2 inches. However, with the cutting board that I have here, the paper cutter, it has a ruler on there, and I don't need my vertical markings for anything in terms of my setup, so I just cut them at 2 inches each, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But the reason why we need these horizontal lines is because I also want to put on that black Sharpie line. So how I've been doing this, and you can measure any way you want to, I just line up my yardstick with the edge of the paper here, and that is how far down I put my black line. That's all there is to it. So I get a Sharpie or another waterproof marker if you want, and I'm going to carefully hold down my yardstick as I go across it. Now, this black line is going to help me test the opacity of my paints. So it's up in mass tone up here, where I can see how transparent or opaque a watercolor is in its mass tone. And then I also eventually write the pigment number at the bottom, and that helps me test the opacity when it's washed out really far. So those I do in my big fat Sharpie, and then up top it doesn't really matter what you use. And so for the next one, let me zoom in, see if you can see this a little bit better. I'm just going to line up the yardstick again with that top line instead of the top of the paper. Then I have the same point where I can put my black line. And I'm just going to do that one more time. So now it's time for my cutting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my strips first, so I have less individual cuts to make. I'm just going to line this up along my line here, or you can measure it at 6 inches, whichever one works. And then I'm going to do the same thing again at 3 inches. And then I can go ahead and cut all of my 2-inch strips. So starting at 12, I'm going to come down to 10. Alright, so on the top part of my card, I write the brand name and then the name of the paint. You could also put other information up here, like the staining properties, whether or not it granulates, the lightfastness, whatever you want, you could put up here. I wanted to keep mine nice and simple. I'm going to go ahead and do, these are the Canson pieces and these are the Arches pieces. And I'm going to go ahead and do two different types of colors. So I'm going to do a granulating color and a non-granulating color so you can see the differences between the two different types of paper. Alright, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch flat brush for these swatch cards. This is the one that I prefer to use because I find that it has a really good width for when I'm painting above this line. I do 1/2 inch, so I do my full mass tone on the top and then grade it down to the bottom that way. But you can use whatever size that you have handy. You don't need to let that stop you or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and do ultramarine first. I'm swatching out some Core colors today, QOR. It's a brand by the Golden Company that does acrylics and whatnot. And my friend Caria over at Coloring Caria here on YouTube sent these to me to try out, so I'm very grateful for that. I'm going to be sending these swatch cards to her for her own personal use, but figured I would record this in the meantime so I could show you all what I do for my process. So I usually end up using like a towel or something, just makes it less messy. I go ahead and get a nice strong color on my brush, and then I start by painting a solid line up over the top. I can go back for a little bit more paint and put a line just underneath so I make sure I have a nice strong color covering that transparency line, and then I start adding water to my brush. This is right here. I start adding water to my brush to grade it down so that I have a nice smooth wash from mass tone to being lighter. If I think that I need more mass tone, I come back up top and then I clean up the grade, and then I set it aside to dry. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on these other 3 cards, and then we'll come back when they're all dry so that you can see them. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at the way these colors turned out on these different swatch cards. I hope that you can see the very, very stark differences. So let's start with the paint that doesn't granulate first. My mass tone stayed where I put it for the magenta. It's nice and dark at the top and it grades out nicely. It is a transparent watercolor, both of these are, so we're not going to see anything there. But overall, it's just a nice smooth gradation. Whereas the Canson paper, which is, it's much smoother and it lets the water kind of float around, which could be good or bad depending on your way and style of painting. But you can see the mass tone actually like left that area and flowed down to the rest of it where I had put water. So you can't even really see the mass tone on this particular paper. And then when we have our granulation colors, our Arches paper is a nice even granulation, like everything looks about the same here, versus the Cores kind of slides around. Let me see if I can zoom in even closer for you so you can look at these two specifically. So I just wanted to show you the two different papers while we were in this little video to show you how different and how important it is to use the correct paper. And even when you're doing your swatch cards, especially like for this one here, I would be much more likely to use and be excited about this color than I would about this color. It's the same pigment, but if all my swatches were done this way, I would not know that this is what I'm capable of. So hopefully that helps when you're deciding what you like to swatch out on. Now I will show you the last little stripe that I do on the cards. Once again, you can get out your towel if you like. I'm just going to get some color on my brush again. Same kind of consistency of the mass tone that I used before at the top of the page. I'm just going to put my 1/2 inch brush at the top here and then pull straight down and try and do it as evenly as I can, preferably in one stroke. Sometimes I have to go back and play around with it, but if I can do it with one stroke, I like to try and do that. Alright everyone, here are our final swatch cards. We have arches on the top and we've got the Canson Montball on the bottom, and you can see how different they kind of swatch out, and it's up to you on how you would like to swatch them out, but I would recommend doing them on whatever paper you use most often for your artwork, and that will give you a good idea how they'll react. Again, we have a non-granulating color and a granulating color, but I could have also done this with opaque and non-opaque colors, or transparent colors for that matter. I will show you kind of what it looks like when we have an opaque color. So here, let me get one that's on arches. Here I've got the Quin Magenta. You can still see that black line. Everything is nice and crisp. And then here I've got Mission Gold's Yellow Ochre number 1. This is not a color I enjoy using, but you can kind of see there that that black line is covered with, you know, the minerals made from the paint. So that's what it would look like if you had an opaque color. Alright everyone, well I hope this video was helpful. I have seen some of you send me pictures like on Instagram of your swatch cards that look just like mine, so I'm glad that they can be inspiring and help you keep things organized, or help you imagine some other kind of swatch card that you want to do for your own collection. So as always, thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing. I'm so glad that you're here, and I will see you next time.